Too cold, we must share one bed and sleep together. Alien woman vertical bar on a cold, distant planet far from Earth. A human traveler found himself stranded in an alien world. The circumstances of his arrival were unknown to him. One moment he was aboard a spaceship, and the next he was tumbling through the cold atmosphere and crashing into the harsh landscape of an unfamiliar planet. With his equipment damaged and his communication systems useless, he was alone. There was no sign of the crew, no way to contact Earth, and nothing but snow-covered mountains and endless ice stretching in every direction. The human knew he had to find shelter, fast. The temperatures were plummeting, and the cold felt like it could freeze him in an instant. He stumbled forward, trying to find any form of warmth or shelter, but the landscape only seemed to grow colder. His body was growing weaker as the wind howled and snowflakes stung his face. He could feel his fingers growing numb, and his breath came out in visible puffs, each one heavier than the last. Then, through the swirling snow, he saw something. A shape in the distance. Something moving. At first he thought it might be a mirage, a trick of the frozen world. But as he approached, he realized it was real. An alien woman standing alone, watching him. Her skin was a pale shade of blue, and her hair shimmered in the wind like silver strands. She was dressed in a tight-fitting, heavy garment designed for the cold, much like his own suit, though it was more elegant and clearly of a different origin. The human's first instinct was to be cautious. Who was she? Was she hostile? But the alien woman didn't seem threatening at all. She merely stood there, gazing at him with calm, intelligent eyes, like she had been waiting for him. There was no hostility, no signs of aggression, just silence. As he stumbled toward her, she spoke, her voice soft but clear. "You are lost." "You will not survive in this cold without help," she said. Her words were strange to him, but somehow he understood. He nodded, too exhausted to speak. The alien woman motioned for him to follow her, and he did, too tired to question her. She led him through the snowy expanse, her movements graceful and sure, as if she had been navigating this frozen planet her entire life. They came upon a small, sheltered cave where the alien woman beckoned him inside. It was warm there, surprisingly so. The walls were lined with a soft, glowing material that seemed to radiate heat. She gestured for him to sit, and he did, his body sagging with relief as the warmth began to seep into his frozen bones. The alien woman moved around the cave, taking out small supplies from her pack. She handed him some food, strange but edible, and some water. She didn't speak much, but there was a quiet understanding between them. She had offered him help, and he accepted without question. As the night deepened, the cold outside grew even more intense. The wind howled, and the snow piled up outside the cave. The human watched the alien woman as she sat across from him, her eyes fixed on the entrance. She seemed to be listening to something he couldn't hear, her expression unreadable. Suddenly, she stood up and turned to him. "You cannot stay here alone," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. "You will freeze if you do." The human blinked, confused. What did she mean? "I will share warmth with you," she added. "We must both survive." The human didn't know how to respond. The idea of sharing a bed with an alien woman, someone completely foreign to him, both in terms of species and culture, was uncomfortable. But in this strange place, with the cold threatening to freeze him solid, he didn't have much of a choice. The alien woman seemed to sense his hesitation. "It is necessary for survival," she explained, as if that made everything clear. He wasn't sure what her exact reasoning was, but the fear of freezing in the harsh cold outweighed any discomfort. Without a word, he agreed, and they both prepared to share the bed. The warmth they shared was immediate. Her body heat, much stronger than his own, helped thaw the frozen chill that had settled deep inside him. As they lay there side by side, the silence between them grew. The human felt awkward, unsure of what to say or do. The alien woman, however, seemed completely at ease, her breathing steady and calm. She had likely done this many times before, surviving in harsh conditions, relying on the warmth of another being to stay alive. As the hours passed, the human began to relax, his earlier tension fading away. The cold outside raged on, but inside the cave it was safe and warm. He couldn't help but notice the quiet strength in the alien woman. Despite her otherworldly appearance, there was something deeply human about her, something he could connect with, even if he didn't fully understand her. At some point, the human drifted off to sleep. The warmth of the alien woman's presence was comforting, and the cold of the planet seemed far away. But even in his sleep, he was aware of the alien woman's watchful gaze. She was guarding him, keeping him safe, just as she had promised. The next morning, the storm outside had not let up. The human awoke to find the alien woman already preparing to leave the cave. She looked at him and nodded. "We must continue. The storm will not pass soon, but we can survive it." With renewed strength, the human rose to his feet. He followed her out into the storm, the snow falling harder than ever. They walked side by side, their steps steady despite the fierce wind. There was no more awkwardness between them, only mutual respect and the understanding that their survival depended on their cooperation. As the day went on, the human realized something. He no longer felt alone in this strange world. The alien woman, despite being from a completely different planet, had become his companion. They were both outcasts here, struggling to survive, but together they made it through. And in a world so cold and unforgiving, that was something to hold on to. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but the human knew one thing for certain. He no longer had to face it alone. And somehow, despite all the differences between them, that meant more than anything else. The storm raged on outside, its cold fingers clawing at the small cave where the human and the alien woman had taken refuge. The morning light barely pierced through the heavy, swirling snow. The temperature had dropped even further, and the howling wind made it nearly impossible to hear anything but its roar. The human could feel the cold biting into his skin as he sat by the cave entrance, looking out at the vast, white emptiness beyond. It was hard to believe he was stuck on an alien world. Everything looked so much like the desolate, freezing landscapes he had seen in survival training. The alien woman, however, seemed unaffected by the storm. Her movements were steady, calm, and purposeful as she worked on gathering their things. She packed her supplies with the precision of someone who had been through this kind of situation before, as if surviving in a frozen world was something she had done countless times. The human couldn't help but marvel at her strength. There was an unspoken confidence in the way she handled herself, a quiet determination that he couldn't ignore. It was a strange feeling, being stuck with her in this cold, alien world. He had expected to feel more out of place, but in her presence, he found something familiar. Her survival instincts, her quiet resolve, and even the way she seemed to understand the unspoken rules of their situation. She never complained. She never faltered. It was almost as if she had been preparing for this moment her entire life. He stood up, stretching his stiff limbs. His body ached from the cold, but more than that, it was the feeling of helplessness that gnawed at him. He had always been someone who took charge, who knew what to do in tough situations, but here, on this strange planet, he felt like a child. The alien woman had been his guide, his protector, and he had relied on her to survive. It wasn't easy for him to admit, but it was the truth. Without her, he wouldn't have made it through the night, let alone the storm. As the day wore on, the two of them worked together, gathering what little they could to sustain themselves. The human took on the tasks she gave him, despite his inner hesitation. But he had never been one to just follow orders, but something about the way the alien woman spoke, quiet and direct, made him want to listen. He felt like he could trust her completely, even though he knew so little about her. She spoke little of herself, only offering snippets of information here and there when the situation called for it. The alien woman had told him that she had lived on this planet her entire life, that her people had learned how to survive in these freezing conditions long before humans had even set foot in space. He didn't ask too many questions, not wanting to pry, but he couldn't help but wonder about her past. She was so different from him. Her skin, her eyes, her language, everything about her screamed that she was from another world. Yet, despite all the differences, they were bound by the same struggle: survival. The hours passed slowly as they worked, both of them moving in sync with each other, like two parts of a machine that had learned to function together. There was no real conversation between them. But in that silence, a connection formed. It wasn't a connection based on words or shared experiences, but on something deeper. They both understood the stakes. They both knew that the only way to make it through this was by relying on each other. As evening approached, the alien woman stopped her work and looked out at the horizon. The snow was still coming down heavily, but there was something different in the air, a stillness, a calm before the storm. The human joined her by the cave entrance, squinting into the swirling white abyss outside. "It's not safe out there," she said, her voice steady but firm. "We need to stay put until the storm passes." The human nodded, understanding the urgency in her words. He had learned quickly that the storm was not something to take lightly. The freezing winds could tear through anything if they weren't careful. He glanced back at the cave, at the small, warm space that had become their sanctuary. It was a simple shelter, but it had kept them safe so far. The alien woman had made sure of that. He wasn't sure how much longer they could last out here, though. Supplies were running low, and they hadn't yet found a way to communicate with anyone outside of this remote world. The human didn't want to think about the possibility of being stranded here forever, but the thought lingered at the back of his mind. As night fell, the cave grew darker. The cold outside intensified, but inside they had managed to create a small fire. The warmth from the flames flickered softly in the otherwise dim space. They sat across from each other, eating what little they had left, and though the alien woman remained quiet, the human could tell she was just as aware of their situation as he was. For a brief moment he allowed himself to wonder what would happen if they couldn't make it out of this place. Would they be stuck here forever, alone in this frozen wasteland? Would he ever see Earth again? But as he looked across the fire at the alien woman, he found himself with a strange sense of peace. She had been his constant in this unpredictable, harsh world. He didn't know what would happen next, but for now, he knew he wasn't alone. The alien woman glanced up, meeting his gaze. Her eyes were steady, unwavering, as if she already knew the answers to all the questions running through his mind. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. There was something unspoken between them, something that went beyond words. She understood. They both understood. The human found himself drawn to her presence. He didn't know why, but in this alien world, she was the one person he trusted completely. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper, something that connected them in a way that defied reason. He had never felt this way before, not with anyone, but with her. It felt natural. As they sat by the fire, the storm outside continued to rage, but the human no longer feared it. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but as long as they had each other, he felt a small sense of hope. The world outside might have been cold and unforgiving, but inside that small cave, there was warmth. There was trust. And there was the quiet promise that, together, they would survive whatever came next. The night stretched on, the warmth from the fire flickering softly as the two of them settled into silence once again. The human couldn't know what the future held, but he did know one thing. He wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time since his arrival on this alien world, that was enough. The next few days passed slowly, the storm outside still showing no signs of letting up. The human and the alien woman had settled into a routine. Every morning they would rise from the warmth of their shared bed and prepare themselves for the cold day ahead. They would gather what little food they had left, tend to the fire, and keep watch over the cave entrance. Time felt like it moved differently here. Each day was filled with a quiet tension, the constant awareness of how fragile their survival truly was. The alien woman remained mostly silent, her actions speaking louder than any words. She was always alert, her eyes scanning the snowy horizon, her posture calm but ready for any danger that might appear. He admired her strength and her quiet confidence. She moved with a purpose, each step sure and controlled. It was clear she had spent her life adapting to these harsh conditions. She had learned how to survive, and she was teaching him in the process, though she never once made him feel inferior. He had questions, so many questions, but he didn't ask them. There was something in the way she carried herself, a quiet wisdom that told him she had her reasons for keeping things to herself. Her story wasn't for him to know, not yet, if ever. He understood that now, respecting the boundaries between them. He had his own past, his own life that felt so distant now. Earth seemed like a lifetime ago. The alien woman had told him little about herself, but enough to understand that she had lived alone on this planet for much longer than he had. Her people, she explained, were no strangers to survival. They had lived on this freezing world for generations, mastering the cold in ways the human could barely comprehend. Still, she never offered more than brief details. She didn't dwell on the past, nor did she seem to expect the human to either. They were both strangers here, two lost souls brought together by the same fate. One evening, as the fire crackled softly between them, the alien woman finally spoke more than usual. "When the storm ends," she said, her voice low and steady, "we will have to leave this place. There are others like us, others who know how to survive." The words hung in the air, and for the first time, the human sensed a change in her demeanor. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps hope, perhaps a reminder of her long-lost kin. It was as though she was remembering something she had buried deep inside herself, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. The human nodded, unsure of what she meant, but willing to follow her lead. "What will we do when the storm ends?" he asked softly. Her gaze met his, her eyes intense. "We will find others. We will go to them." Her words were simple, but they carried weight. She had been alone for a long time, and the thought of finding others, of reuniting with her own kind, seemed to stir something in her, something she hadn't felt in years. The human understood that this journey wasn't just about surviving the storm anymore. It was about something deeper, about finding a sense of belonging, of connection in a world that had isolated them both. They had been thrown together by fate, but now there was a chance to find something more. It was a chance to rebuild, to find hope again in a place that had seemed so cold and indifferent. The next day, the storm began to die down, its howling winds weakening as the snow slowly began to settle. The air felt still, as though the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The human and the alien woman packed their belongings, preparing to leave the shelter of the cave. It wasn't easy, but the alien woman's calm presence helped him feel ready. Together they would face whatever lay ahead. The cold was still biting, but it wasn't as fierce as it had been. The human could feel the warmth of the alien woman beside him, and for the first time since the crash, he didn't feel so alone. They walked side by side, their steps synchronized as they trudged through the deep snow. The landscape stretched out before them, vast, silent, and unforgiving. Yet, in that silence, there was a kind of peace. It wasn't the peace of knowing everything would be fine, but the peace of knowing that they were facing this together. That was enough. The alien woman led the way, her eyes always scanning the surroundings, alert for any sign of danger. The human followed closely behind, watching her movements. There was something almost mesmerizing about the way she moved, graceful yet strong. She was a survivor through and through. And in that moment, he realized that he had become one, too. He had learned so much from her already, not just about surviving in the cold, but about resilience, about finding strength even when it seemed impossible. As they walked, the human found himself wondering about the alien woman's life before all of this. What had it been like for her, growing up on a planet like this? What had she lost? And what had kept her going all these years? But as much as he wanted to ask, he knew it wasn't the time. The journey ahead was uncertain, and there was no need to dwell on the past. The future was what mattered now. And as long as they had each other, there was a chance. Hours passed as they trudged through the snow, the silence between them comfortable, though heavy with the unspoken weight of their shared struggle. The cold gnawed at the human, but he didn't complain. He had come to understand that this was just part of the journey. There were moments when it felt unbearable, but those moments passed, and the warmth of the alien woman's presence made it easier to keep going. By the time the sun began to set, casting a pale golden light over the snow-covered world, they had reached the top of a ridge. From there, the human could see the vast expanse of the planet stretching out before them. An endless sea of white. It was both beautiful and terrifying. The world was harsh, unforgiving, but it was also breathtaking in its raw power. In that moment, the human felt something stir inside of him. This world, for all its challenges, was not just a prison. It was a place of opportunity, of new beginnings, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was a place where he could find a new purpose. The alien woman stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the horizon. He followed her gaze, wondering what she saw in that distant land. Maybe she saw the possibility of a future, of finding others like her. Maybe she saw a way home. Whatever it was, he could sense that she was ready for whatever came next. And for the first time since the crash, he felt ready too. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but together, they had made it this far. And with each step they took, the world seemed a little less cold, a little less unforgiving. In this alien place, they had found something important. Each other. And that, the human realized, was the greatest gift of all. The days following the storm were a blur of exhaustion and hope. The human and the alien woman had continued their journey across the snow-covered terrain, pushing through the harsh conditions with a silent determination. Every step forward felt like a victory, even when the cold threatened to freeze them to the bone. They kept moving, knowing that stopping wasn't an option. Survival had become their shared goal, and in that pursuit they had formed a bond stronger than either of them could have imagined when they first met. The landscape they crossed seemed endless, with no signs of civilization. The cold still nipped at their skin, the wind biting through their clothes. But they had learned to adapt. The human was no longer as unsure of himself. He had become accustomed to the alien woman's presence, to her strength, her steady nature. He had learned to read her body language, to understand her silence, and to rely on the way she seemed to know exactly what to do next. They had come across a few strange creatures during their travels, some small, others large, but none had posed any real threat. The alien woman was always the first to spot danger, her senses sharp and unyielding. The human had learned to trust her instincts. Whenever she signaled for him to move quickly, he did so without hesitation. His life now depended on her, and he knew she would not lead him astray. As the days turned into weeks, the world around them began to change. The snowstorms became less frequent, the winds less harsh. They had left the freezing mountains behind and had begun to make their way through a series of valleys. The cold was still present, but the landscape was different. The snow here was not as deep, and the air had a certain clarity to it. The alien woman spoke more now, sharing bits of knowledge about her world that the human could barely comprehend. She told him about her people, how they had lived for centuries on this planet, learning to adapt to the harsh environment. She spoke of their resilience, their ability to survive against all odds. The human had always admired the alien woman's strength, but now he saw the depth of her experience. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a teacher, a guide, someone who had endured much more than he could imagine. And through it all, she had never given up. She had kept going, kept fighting, and in doing so, had become a symbol of hope in a place that seemed to offer none. One afternoon, as they rested by a small creek, the alien woman finally spoke more about her past. Her voice was quiet, almost as if she were testing the words before she spoke them. "My people have always lived here," she said, her gaze distant as she stared at the flowing water. "We learned to live with the cold, to thrive in it. But it is not without cost. Many of us have been lost to the storms, to the dangers of the planet. I was alone for a long time, just surviving. I never thought I would meet anyone again." The human listened intently, unsure of how to respond. He had always assumed the alien woman had been part of a group, but now he understood. She had been isolated just like him. The thought of being alone for so long, of having no one to rely on, filled him with a deep sense of sympathy. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for her. "And then you came," she continued, turning her head to look at him. "I never thought I would find someone not here. But now I am not alone." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had never thought about their journey that way. For him, it had always been about survival, about getting through each day. But for the alien woman, it had become something more. It was a reminder that even in the most isolated and harshest places, there was a possibility for connection, for companionship.
"I'm glad I met you," the human said, his voice softer than he intended.
It was the truth, though. He couldn't deny it. She had been his rock, his guide, and, in a way, his savior. And in turn, he had given her something she hadn't had in years, a partner, someone to share the burden of survival with. The alien woman nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "We make a good team," she said simply. Her words didn't need any elaboration. They both understood what she meant. They had been through so much together, each trial bringing them closer. They had relied on each other, not just for survival, but for the human connection they had both longed for in the silence of the icy world around them. As the days passed, their journey began to take on a new rhythm. They still faced challenges, harsh weather, scarce resources, and the occasional dangerous creature. But now, they faced them with a sense of certainty. They knew they could handle whatever came their way. The bond between them had grown into something unspoken, but strong. They didn't need words to know what the other was thinking. They had learned to read each other's actions, to communicate through glances and gestures. It was a quiet understanding, a partnership formed not just out of necessity, but out of respect and trust. One evening, as the sky above them began to darken, the alien woman stopped in her tracks. She stood still, her eyes scanning the horizon. The human followed her gaze, sensing that something was different this time. There was a tension in the air, a sense of anticipation that he couldn't quite place. "What is it?" he asked softly. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she motioned for him to follow her, leading him up a steep incline. They moved swiftly, almost as if they were following some unseen path, as though they had both known exactly where to go. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of walking, they reached the top of a ridge. The human's breath caught in his throat as he looked out over the valley below. In the distance, he saw a cluster of buildings, small and primitive, but unmistakable. It was a sign of life. The alien woman's people, or at least some of them, had to be there. "This is it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can feel them." The human stood beside her, his heart racing. They had finally reached the end of their journey. They had made it. And in that moment, as he looked out over the land that had once seemed so foreign and unwelcoming, he realized that the cold and the isolation had shaped them both. But it had also brought them together. They had survived, not just because they were strong, but because they had each other.
"We made it," he said, his voice filled with awe.
The alien woman nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant settlement. "We did. she replied, and for the first time in a long while, the human believed it too. They had found their way, not just through the wilderness, but toward something greater. And as they stood there together, looking at the future that awaited them, he knew that they would face it as partners, stronger than they had ever been before. As they made their way down the ridge, the human couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the sight before him. The settlement in the distance, though small, was a sign of life. It wasn't the bustling cities of Earth, but to him, it represented something far more important: hope. For weeks, they had traveled across a barren, frozen landscape with nothing but each other for company. Now, as they neared the settlement, it felt like the end of one journey and the beginning of another. The alien woman was a few steps ahead, her posture alert and confident, as though she knew exactly where she was going. The human followed closely behind, unsure of what to expect. He had so many questions. What was life like here? How would the alien woman's people react to him, a human? He hadn't spent much time thinking about what would happen when they reached this place, mostly focusing on survival. But now, with the settlement so close, the uncertainty of the future began to settle in. They walked for hours, the sun slowly dipping below the horizon as they neared the settlement. The human could see smoke rising from chimneys, signs of warmth and life. As they drew closer, he noticed that the buildings were made from materials he had never seen before: rough-hewn stone, metal, and a type of plant he couldn't identify. The settlement felt like something out of a storybook, a small, resilient community built in the harshest of conditions. Finally, they reached the edge of the settlement. The alien woman stopped and turned to the human, her face serious but calm. "This is where I come from," she said, her voice quiet. "My people live here. You will be safe." The human nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. They had made it. They had survived the storm, the cold, and the dangers of the planet. And now, they had arrived at a place where they could find shelter, warmth, and perhaps even answers. But as much as he wanted to rush forward, he could tell that the alien woman was still holding something back. She hadn't said much about what to expect from her people, and that made him nervous. What if they didn't accept him? What if they saw him as a threat or an outsider? He wasn't sure what kind of reception they would get, but he trusted the alien woman. If she believed he would be safe, that was enough for him. As they entered the settlement, they were greeted with cautious curiosity. The alien woman walked with a sense of purpose, her head held high, but the human noticed that the people here looked at her with a mix of reverence and hesitation. Some of them whispered to each other, their eyes darting between her and the human. It was clear that she wasn't just a member of this community. She was someone important. Her presence commanded attention, and the way the others regarded her suggested that she had earned their respect. The human felt a wave of gratitude for her strength and leadership. She had led him through this journey, and now she was guiding him into a new chapter of their lives. The human tried to stay in the background, keeping his head down and walking quietly beside her. He didn't want to draw too much attention to himself, but it was impossible to avoid the stares. Some of the alien woman's people seemed confused by his presence, but others gave him small nods of acknowledgement. The settlement wasn't a large place, but it felt alive. There were children playing in the streets, adults working, and families gathered around small fires. The air was filled with the scent of cooking food, and there was a warmth here that the human hadn't felt in what seemed like forever. It was a stark contrast to the endless cold of the wilderness they had just crossed. After walking through the settlement for a while, they reached a large circular building at the center of the village. It was more elaborate than the others, with tall stone walls and intricate carvings that the human couldn't understand. The alien woman led him inside, where the temperature was noticeably warmer. There was a large fire burning in the center, and several people were gathered around it, talking quietly. The alien woman spoke to them in her native language, and though the human didn't understand the words, he could sense the respect in the room. Her tone was calm but authoritative, and the others responded to her with equal respect. After a few moments, she turned to the human. "This is the council," she said. "They will decide what happens next." The human swallowed, feeling a knot form in his stomach. He had no idea what to expect. He wasn't a part of this world, and there was so much he didn't know. The alien woman had told him that he would be safe, but what did that really mean? What kind of place was this, and how would its people react to someone like him? One of the figures by the fire stood up and stepped forward. The alien woman nodded to him, and the human immediately recognized the shift in the room. The man, or rather, the alien, was older, his skin a darker shade than the alien woman's, and his eyes were sharp with experience. He studied the human for a long moment before speaking in a language the human didn't understand. The alien woman quickly translated, her voice steady. "He asks why you are here," she said to the human, her gaze steady. "What is your purpose?" The human took a deep breath. "I'm not sure I have a clear answer to that," he said, his voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside him. "I ended up here by accident. My ship crashed, and I was stranded. I was lucky to find your people. Your companion helped me survive. She's the reason I'm still here." The elder alien studied him for a moment, and the human couldn't quite read the expression on his face. There was no warmth in his eyes, but there was no hostility either. It was as if the elder was trying to decide whether or not to trust him. After a long silence, the elder spoke again, and this time the alien woman translated. "He believes you are a wanderer, a lost traveler," she said. "But he also believes you have no ill intentions. You are here because you have no choice, and for that reason, you will be allowed to stay." The human felt a wave of relief wash over him, but there was something else, something deeper. The elder's words weren't just an acceptance, they were a challenge. The human wasn't just going to be allowed to live among these people. He was going to have to prove himself. He would have to earn his place, just as the alien woman had earned hers. "We will give you shelter," the elder continued, "but you must show us that you can contribute, that you are worthy of being here. We do not take in strangers without reason." The alien woman looked at the human, her eyes steady and unwavering. "You will have to earn their trust," she said softly. "But you are not alone anymore." In that moment, the human realized that this was just the beginning. The journey they had gone on together, surviving the cold, battling the elements, had been the first step. But now, they were in a place where survival would take on a different meaning. Here, in this strange new world, he would have to prove that he belonged. And in doing so, he would have to show the people of this settlement that he could be a part of something greater than just his own survival. But as he looked at the alien woman who had already done so much for him, he felt a sense of determination rise within him. He had come so far. He wasn't going to give up now. He had a new home, new people to prove himself to, and a new chance to build a life. And no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would face them with the same quiet strength that had carried him this far. The journey was far from over. But now, for the first time, he felt ready to face whatever came next. Together they would make a new life in this strange alien world. And maybe, just maybe, he would find a place to call home.